Chapter 6 City of Emperors. Empress Vesha Fandulian was loved across the empire for her generosity, wisdom, kindness, and beauty. People had a way of forgetting the heads that had rolled and the cities that had been burned when she rose to power after her husband's death. No woman, and a foreigner at that, who held together her husband's empire and managed to keep control long after her son came of age, did so without a bit of iron in her bones and ice in her veins. Yet people seemed to overlook what the armies did in Vesha's name, so long as it kept the peace and maintained their prosperity. Vesha was technically a usurper. She'd held on to the throne, though Daendrith was years into manhood, but people were willing to overlook that too, so long as she kept them fat and rich. Since learning of Daendrith's condition, Amira now had a better idea of why Vesha had chosen to keep power. All the same, she felt a growing dread building within her the closer they came to the imperial capital of Manadra. Daendrith hadn't spoken of his mother or his curse in the days that followed their departure from Lashera. The closest he came was telling Amira who had sent a carriage that joined them several days from the city. Apparently, it was to ensure that the newly betrothed couple approached the capital in the proper splendor. The carriage rattled along at a steady pace, pulled by the team of dappled gray geldings that moved at a high stepping trot. Amira studied the landscape outside the small glass window, ignoring Daendrith's stare. Daendrith continued to stare, glance away for a time, and then end up staring again. They hadn't been alone together since the night she'd tried to assassinate him in his tent. Always there had been at least Thadrid or Talon and one of the retinue's women nearby, and the guards within easy call. Still, it was easy to forget what she had seen in that dark tent more than a fortnight ago. Daendrith was always polite. He often scintillated between painfully formal and tentatively informal. He never asked about her mother, or the sorceresses outright. But the curiosity was there. Nor did he ask her about what she'd done for her father, or where she'd been trained as an assassin. And since commanding her that first night on the road not to harm any of his servants, guards, or retainers, he hadn't given her an outright order. She'd been sure he meant to make an example of her once they reached the city. Now she wasn't so sure. Amira finally stopped dodging Daendrith's stare and met his gaze. He looked away almost immediately. If she hadn't known better, she would have thought he was shy. "Is there something on your mind, Your Highness?" Amira asked, breaking the silence. Daendrith inhaled, looking out the window. "Call me Daendrith." Amira stiffened as the command reached her. "As you wish, Daendrith." The archduke shot her a look and realized his mistake. "No, that's not what I meant. You can call me what you want." Amira felt a slight tug as the command was dismissed. "But I would prefer for you to call me Daendrith," he said. "At least when we're in private." Amira nodded her hands in her lap. "I don't know what to make of you, Your Highness." Daendrith ran a hand through his hair. "Look, Amira, I don't know what we are, but I don't want us to be enemies." Amira looked away. "We've barely spoken for the past week. Why the sudden urgency?" "It's just, we're about to reach the palace, and things will change. They'll be more complicated." Amira blinked at him. "To be fair, they're already quite complicated." Daendrith laughed awkwardly. "You have a point there." As he squirmed in his seat like a schoolboy talking to a debutante, Amira realized she didn't fear the archduke. The thing inside him, yes, but not the man himself. "Do you trust me, Amira?" Amira considered that for a moment. I trust you as much as I trust myself." She often felt as if he was trying to win her over. It was silly, really. He was the archduke. He didn't have to win anyone. His father had already won him everything some 20 years ago. It didn't matter, either way. Amira had already made up her mind. If it was what he wanted, she'd marry Dangerous. Let him bed her, give him heirs. She wouldn't even try to fight it. What was the point? He could order her into submission anyway, and resistance would only put her family, more specifically Faunra, at risk. "Will your children be like you?" Amira asked. She couldn't quite bring herself to say our. "With your curse?" Outside the window, the carriage passed the outlying towns and villages dotting the countryside surrounding Manadra. Life in the towns came to a halt as the imperial party passed through. Spectators gathered along the road or squinted through windows to catch a glimpse of His Highness. Yes. Dangerous looked back to her, and there was a sadness in his eyes, perhaps even guilt. "At least the firstborn son, I think. This curse passed to me some time after my father died." Amira shifted. "Your father was cursed too?" It was the first she'd heard of it. They hadn't discussed Dangerous' secret at all during their travel. At least, not openly. "He was," Dangerous said. "I think it's my bloodline." Amira pulled her sleeves further over her wrists. She wasn't sure how to respond. "If you can help me with this curse." Dangerous cleared his throat. "We might be able to change that." Amira shook her head. "I wouldn't even know where to start." The archduke didn't try to make her speak again. He wore a black doublet and trousers that looked more befitting for a funeral than a homecoming. The way he kept shifting his weight, checking his cuffs, and glancing around, one might have thought he was a page on the way to his first ball. Amira's dress was the color of alabaster, no doubt a tribute to the imperial coat of arms. Beaded with pearls around the cuffs, collar, waist, and hem, Amira wore enough wealth in that moment to feed a village for a week. One of the officers' wives had somehow managed to procure it in the roadside town where they'd stayed 3 nights ago. They continued on in silence, save for the rattling of the carriage and the clop of horse hooves around them. Dangerous toyed with his signet ring, the imperial seal flashing gold on his right hand. "Why don't you wear a ring like Badred's?" Amira asked. "I wear a ring," Dangerous countered, gesturing to the imperial signet. "No, I mean one that absorbs spells." Amira saw no point in hiding that she knew. "So you can tell what it does?" Dangerous evasively responded. "Obviously," Amira quipped back. "It doesn't work for me," was all Dangerous said. "None of the soldiers either." The carriage stopped before Amira could ask why. A knight leveled his horse with the side window. "Your Highness, we've reached the city gates. We should be reaching the palace within an hour." A muscle in Dangerous' cheek tensed, but he nodded and said, "Very good." They rattled under the shadow of the gates and into the city, though the air held a certain mustiness that belied their closeness to the sea. The streets were swept clean as a stable on Maying Day. Their surroundings teemed with caw. The air itself seemed ready to burst with life in every form, human bodies packed together along the streets. Swallows and ravens flitted overhead. Dogs, cats, rats, and other rodents scuffled on the ground. As they drew closer to the heart of the city and the palace, they passed grand libraries, universities, and theaters. There were numerous shrines and temples dedicated to the All, the creation god and the king of the heavens. Here was the only place where shrines to him were legal. The only place that the higher-ranking cardinals and bishops offered prayers to him. Outside the capital, Only the lesser gods could be worshipped. Amira attempted not to gawp. She had been to places with these kinds of establishments, but none so grand, so lavish, so ornate. The city seemed to be the product of 1,000 master architects and engineers, each trying to outdo the others. Spires, columns, and arches competed for space, height, breadth, and ornamentation. Several of the libraries boasted outer carvings so detailed the stone appeared to be lace. Manadra was everything it was fabled to be and more. A number of people, mostly women, pointed conspicuously to Amira, sitting in plain sight across from the archduke. She wished she could blend into the background, but in her white dress, seated on bright blue cushions, that was not an option. She didn't doubt that word had already reached the capital of Dangerth's trade, the sorceress's scion in place of the high-born broodmare. As soon as their carriage drew to a halt before the massive entrance to the palace, his strained outlook of serenity began to crack. Amira couldn't help but notice the subtle deepening to the lines in his forehead and around his mouth. Amira squinted up at the sheer walls of towering marble that rose above them, mounds of stone so high they hid the sun. Legend said the royal palace was built by the gods for Adrigos Vandulian, Dangerth's distant ancestor. Amira had always scoffed at that, but now, in the shadow of the White Palace, it seemed impossible that men could build such a colossus. Spires and towers punctuated the palace's outline, and glazed windows shone from the upper levels. The heavily guarded battlements blended into the rest of the palace with an understated elegance that made them a thing of beauty. The gates swung open as booming trumpets announced the return of the Grand Archduke. Dangerth grimaced as the carriage horses were goaded onwards into a large gravel courtyard. Once inside, the carriage trundled on. Dangerth sagged in his seat. Here there were still many who stopped and waved, though the Archduke no longer tried to return their greetings. Dangerth noticed she was staring at him, and Amira studied the palace to avoid his gaze. The carriage squeezed through an archway and under a second gate into the main keep of the palace. They pulled to a stop before a large stone archway with broad steps sweeping upwards. An obliging liveryman opened the carriage door, but Dangerth just sat there. Talon and several of the others had dismounted and now stood waiting to escort them inside. A large troop of pages, footmen, and chambermaids in starched white uniforms bustled out of the stone arch. The servants fell into rows behind the soldiers, standing at attention before their lord. Clearing his throat, Dangerth stepped out of the carriage and reached back a hand for her. Amira would have preferred not to touch the Archduke with bare skin, but she could hardly shun him. She reluctantly slipped her hand into his. The Archduke held her fingers carefully, politely. Her skin tingled hot where he touched. He touched her easily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Amira stepped out after him, taking care not to trip on the hem of her dress. Dangerth rested her hand on the crook of his arm. That brought her closer to his side, and she was a little surprised at how easily she fit against him, as if she had been intended to stand there, and hadn't been a last-minute substitution for Fonra. A round of measured, cultivated cheers rose from the servants and the soldiers gathered outside. It occurred to Amira that this courtyard of lackeys and guards were catching their first glimpse of their future empress. Assuming Dangerth actually planned to marry her, and Vesha actually planned to step down at some point. If the outside of the palace was impressive, the inside was awe-inspiring. The archway led up into a broad hall, white enamel and gold inlay complementing one another in intricate designs. Crystal chandeliers flickered from the high domed ceiling like stars. Amira stared up at the carved scenes of orchards and satyrs. She had never been anywhere more beautiful, more luxurious. Their footsteps rang in the spacious hall. Many grand arches led off to their left and right. But Daedrith marched straight ahead, the servants following dutifully after him. Amira close at his side. Under her hand, the muscles in his arm constricted. She glanced to him, his unease strong enough to rattle through their bond. They were in his home, where he should be safer than anywhere in the world. What could distress him here? Their retinue reached a landing hung with thick tapestries woven in scarlet and white, as if they had been painted in blood. On the tapestries were scenes of hunts, forests, and the gods speaking with unnamed kings, knowable only by their crowns. "Your Imperial Highness." A matronly, round woman met them, flanked by a small battalion of butlers, chambermaids, valets, and assorted staff. A large ring of keys jangled at the matron's waist as she bowed, identifying her as the archduke's keykeeper and manager of his household. "We're honored to have you home, my lord, and welcome you." Daedrith inclined his head to the woman, seeming to look past her. "Thank you, Mr. Scalage. It's good to be home." He stepped a little to the side, taking Amira's hand again. Raising their clasped hands, he turned to face the assassin. "May I present Lady Amira Brindonu, daughter of King Hyle, and my betrothed." Daedrith introduced her with flourish, like she was something to be proud of, but she flinched at the sound of her Istavari surname. Here in the palace, the seat of Fandulian power and legacy, the name seemed almost sacrilegious. Word must have been sent ahead because not one of the servants batted an eye. With practiced choreography, the keykeeper and her legions of servants bowed as one. "We welcome you, Your Grace." Amira had not been called that in a long time, not since her mother had been banished. Odd how it still felt right, like a glove that had kept its fit. Amira returned the bow. "I already feel welcome. Thank you." "Your rooms have been prepared, my lord," the keykeeper, Mistress Scalage, said to the archduke. "Yours and your lady bride's." The keykeeper smiled a little, though there was a tightness to the expression that Amira couldn't quite interpret. "Your imperial mother has asked that you see her at once. She awaits you in her solarium." "Very good." Daedrith watched what seemed to be the wall behind the keykeeper, not really seeing the woman. "I will see Lady Amira to her rooms first." Mistress Scalage bowed at the waist, impressively graceful for one of her girth. "North wing, my lord. I will have one of the hall boys take you." Daedrith inclined his head in a short, chopped gesture. The hall boy stepped forward, bowed, and Daedrith leapt to follow the boy, jerking Amira after him. Daedrith started, glancing back to her like he'd forgotten she was there. "Forgive me, He cleared his throat. "Are you ready?" The assassin swallowed. "Yes, Your Highness." Daedrith inclined his head in embarrassment, or perhaps apology, before following the hall boy again, slower this time. They trekked through the palace after the boy for perhaps 10 minutes before reaching the residential portions of the palace. Amira tried not to stare as they wound their way through the imperial halls. She had seen wealth before, opulence. Highlandale was by no means a poor kingdom, and yet black and white checkered tiles dotted the floor in a symmetrical pattern. White marble walls and pillars suspended domed ceilings that looked like vaults of clouds. Lamp sconces nestled in the walls every few paces, enough to bathe these halls in light come dark. Feather motifs decorated the base of the floors and pillars, the edges of the windows as well as the brass door handles and window hinges. The retinue reached a large set of doors into the north wing of the palace. Life-size ravens of white marble perched on either side, milky eyes staring into space. The apartment assigned Amira was 10 times more luxurious than anything she had ever seen before, much less lived in. Gaping up at the elaborate gilt work of the high ceiling, it was difficult not to be impressed. The whole of the entryway was done in blue and white, in keeping with Vesha's banner colors. In the parlor, the couch cushions were done in aquamarine velvet. A marble hearth, swept spotlessly white, commanded the space before the sitting chairs. Portraits of long-dead nobles and laughing children adorned the walls. Through the opened door of the bedroom, Amira glimpsed a periwinkle canopy spanning a massive bed draped in a sapphire coverlet. Tapestries done in varying shades of blue, with decorative white runes hung the walls. Part of a body-length mirror shone from near what appeared to be the boudoir, stuffed full of gowns and dresses. "This is where you will be staying." Dangerth's attendants waited in the hall as he ushered her through the door. Amira silently nodded, far more awestruck than she would like him to know. The rustle of fabric brought Amira's attention to a slim girl with large eyes and shallow cheekbones. Her white dress marked her as a servant in the higher tiers. She lowered herself into a butter-smooth curtsy. "My name is Shazni. I've been assigned to serve you, milady." Amira sized the girl up, not yet sure what to make of her. Two younger servants in the light blue of chambermaids flanked Shazni. "You must be very tired, milady." Shazni never allowed the sweet smile to leave her lips. It was the same brand of requisite courtesy Amira had seen from barmaids and street vendors. Amira glanced to Dangerth, but he was already shrugging her hand off. "Don't cause any trouble," he grumbled. Amira frowned at him. Did he really think she would attack servants? Then again, why wouldn't he? She was as much a monster as he was. Dangerth retreated into the hall, and a hallboy shut the door after him, but not before she glimpsed the two guards posted outside. "Welcome to Manadra, milady," Shazni said. "Those of us in the archduke's staff are all determined to do everything we can do to make you feel at home." Flattery. Flowery lies. It had to be, no matter how genuine the girl sounded. "Thank you," Amira said. Her words were brittle, flickering close to fear. "When we heard the archduke's carriage had arrived, we prepared your bath. We're sure you will want to prepare for this evening." "This evening?" "Her Imperial Majesty would like you and the archduke to dine with her." Shazni ushered Amira toward the bedroom. Amira had to admit that the idea of a bath was appealing. They had been on the road for over a week, and the closest she had come to washing was splashing water on her face at a wayside inn. Amira let Shazni and her junior handmaidens lead her into the bedchamber. Inside, it was even more spectacular than Amira had seen from the parlor. Golden cherubs beamed down from the ceiling, dancing amid painted clouds. Crystal prisms dangled from the lamps, and gold brocade adored the drapes of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Shazni herded Amira into a spacious bathing chamber connected to the bedroom. A wall of steam burst free the moment the door was opened. Tiled in the same pristine white marble as the fireplace, it boasted a soaking tub that could have fit an auric bull. There were two spigots poised above the steaming tub, and their gold handles shone with polishing. Though Amira had heard of running and heated water, in Highlandale a hot bath meant dragging the water from the well and heating it in a cauldron for an hour. A milky white substance filled the tub, fresh sprigs of herbs floating on the surface. The rich odor of lavender and sandalwood wrapped Amira like a robe. She didn't realize she had been staring until Shazni spoke. "Would you like me to help you undress, milady?" "What? Yes." Her stitches had been removed by now, but her side was still bandaged, and Amira was still sore and had trouble reaching the laces at the back of her gown. The assassin hesitated, stiffening as Shazni undid the knotted cords at her lower back. How was she going to explain the scar, if word spread that she had a spear wound in her side? "There is an elixir in the bath from the archduke's own physician." Shazni helped Amira first tug off the right sleeve and then her left. "It will help you with your wound." The assassin shot Shazni a glare, flinching away. The other girl didn't react with more than a sweet smile. "The archduke sent word, milady." What stories would spread from these servants? By morning, how many would know that their archduke's intended had a spear wound? The women who had attended her on the road had helped change her bandages and fetch her willow bark tinctures, but never once asked how she'd come by her injuries. These girls didn't either, but Amira knew servants well enough to know that word would spread somehow. Amira allowed the girls to help her out of her dress. Like everyone else Dangerous had ordered to attend her, they were far gentler than anyone in her father's employ had ever been. They handled her with care, kindness even, the same way Dangerous did. One of the girls let off a soft gasp as Amira's bare skin was exposed. Scars decorated her body in haphazard white lines. The assassin pretended not to notice as Shazni muttered a scolding to the girl and they helped Amira into the bath. None of the girls made any other acknowledgement of her past or present injuries. They helped Amira remove the bandage around her ribs, now only covering a line of pink skin. Amira sank into the tub and barely managed to restrain a sigh of pleasure. The warm water engulfed her like a dream. The milky white substance soaked the seam of where her stitches had been, soothing the cracked edges of her wound. Out of habit, she searched the room for anything that could be used for a weapon, but aside from the towels and the soap, everything else was bolted into the stone. Even the silver soap dish was melted into the polished rock. It was, perhaps, 3 hours after noon? Most nobles dined close to the 7th hour this time of year, so Amira expected she had 2 or 3 hours. Her mind wandered in circles for a few minutes as she let the warm, milky water seep into her pores and loosen the dirt of weeks' travel. Dangerous most likely didn't want her dead. He was going through too much trouble. The marriage contract, the secrecy, even this room. Amira was no catch as far as alliances went. She could bring nothing to a marriage that Fanra wouldn't have, and much less as the bastard daughter. The assassin had overheard one of Dangerous' lawyers say the empress would most likely need to legitimize Amira by imperial decree for any marriage to be legal. There was only one logical reason for Dangerous to want her. In truth, he'd admitted as much. He wanted help with his curse, and for some reason thought marrying her was the only way to get it. Amira shifted in the water at the memory of that thing. That creature, demon, or whatever it was. Was it an Istavari curse? Amira didn't know much about her mother's people. She'd been but a child when the sorceresses had cursed whole swaths of land and been driven into the northern mountains. They'd poisoned an entire forest, now called the Curse Wood. It remained uninhabitable to this day, and no one who entered it was ever seen again. Dangerous' condition was far different, but a curse on an imperial archduke, especially Tristan's son, sounded like something Amira's mother would have done. Her grandmother, too. The handmaidens helped Amira scrub the dirt from her skin. They cleared the grime off her body and moved on to her hair, working with efficiency but gentleness. The girls massaged honey and lemon into her hair, scrubbing down to her scalp. Amira closed her eyes, letting herself enjoy it despite everything. How long had it been since she'd had such a thorough bath? Years, at least. The girls combed her hair free of tangles and then rinsed away the honey. One of them scrubbed between her toes, while the other clipped her nails and massaged her hands with sweet-smelling oil. Outside the bathing room, Shazni bustled around, rustling silk and opening and closing the doors. Amira could only guess what she was doing. When the girls had finished and it was time for her to leave the water, Amira was more than a little reluctant. If she was going to be kept in a gilded cage, she might as well find some enjoyment. Her handmaids wrapped her in a massive terry-cloth towel and ushered her into her bedchamber. Amira's bare feet left prints on the thick rug. The girls proffered silken smallclothes and a soft blue dressing gown. The dressing gown was made of the softest cloth, shimmering luxuriously. The undergarments were starched and clean and comprised of much more lace than Amira would have liked. Shazni materialized almost the moment Amira belted on the dressing gown. The lady's maid stepped out of a sizable boudoir, filled nearly to bursting with sparkling gowns, jewels, and all the trappings of an imperial woman. It seemed Dangerous had ordered them to compensate for Amira's lack of a trousseau. The maid cast her a warm smile. "I think there are several here that would fit you magnificently. What do you think?" The girl held aloft a trio of lavish gowns. One was pure gold with black brocade stitched into the bodice. The second was long and flowing, dyed the deepest purple Amira had ever seen. The third was blue velvet with silver stitching. "They're all beautiful." Amira blinked at the 3 dresses. "I don't think I've ever..." She cleared her throat. This wasn't real, she reminded herself. Dangerous was using her. "I'm not sure which I prefer." Shazni glanced to the junior maids. "If you'd like to rest, we can wait a few hours to start getting ready, my lady." "I'd like that. Thank you." The 2 younger girls exited first. Shazni left with a curtsy after hanging the dresses back up, saying something about what time she would come back and a bell rope by the bed. Once she was alone, Amira explored the layout of her apartment as if she would be drawing a map. From the bedroom she found that there were 4 doors, 1 to the boudoir, 1 to the bathing chamber, and 2 leading into the parlor. The foyer took up a large space to one side of the parlor. A domed ceiling over the entryway gave the illusion of a separate room, while a crystal chandelier hung overhead, already glimmering with candlelight. She memorized the number of steps across the parlor and across her bedchamber. She prodded at the furniture to make sure there was nothing hidden inside. She searched the chimneys of the 2 hearths, one in the parlor, the other in her bedchamber, and flipped through the bookshelves lining the far side of the parlor. From the bedroom, Amira had a view of the imperial gardens. The maze of lawns, flower beds, and trees sprawled over a vast expanse, as though a master artist had brought a great work to life. Rows of neatly trimmed trees and bushes grew in tended lines. Fountains spurted into the square basins, splashing among the water lilies and bright orange shapes Amira thought to be koi. Not more than 200 paces away rose a pillar that narrowed before abruptly cutting off into a sharp point. The pillar was carved of white quartz, glinting in the sun like a polished bone. Squinting, Amira glimpsed fresh heather and sage strewn at the base. Capping the pillar was a pair of silver crescents bound back to back, the second moon. A jolt went through Amira at the sight of it. A shrine to Moraine, in Manadra of all places. The goddess of pacts and bargains was purposefully omitted in most clerical ministrations. Not only was she seen as too dangerous, too mercenary. Many superstitions said that a shrine to Moraine invited the attention of her children, the Sithraul, the demons of the dread marches in the underworld. Amira added the shrine to her list of mysteries surrounding the archduke and his mother. In the end, Shazni suggested the gold brocade dress, and Amira consented, sliding into the rich fabric as the sun caressed the distant ocean. Amira perched on a stool in the boudoir as Shazni and the other 2 girls worked her hair into plaits. They dusted her eyes with gold powder and lined them with kohl before lightly staining her lips and cheeks with some sort of crimson dye. Staring in the mirror, Amira barely recognized herself. The girl looking back at her was wearing the dress of a princess and all the trappings of a lady. The reflection wasn't a sorceress's daughter or a Kadrahan assassin. Amira could almost believe that, perhaps, in another life, She might have made a fine archduchess. Amira straightened at a knock at the door. "One moment," Shazni shouted through a mouthful of jewel-tipped hairpins. She shoved several more into Amira's hair and retreated to the entryway, rushing like a summoned puppy. Amira listened intently to Shazni's voice in the other room. The words were unclear, but she sounded respectful, deferential. The girl came scurrying back, face flush with excitement. "Come, milady, just a few more touches." Shazni clipped orders for the two younger girls to finish pinning up Amira's last few curls and braids. They finished, and took a moment to admire their work before bustling her out. On butter-soft slippers, Amira lifted her skirts to step out of the boudoir and into the parlor. The brocade of her skirts glittered in the firelight. Daindrith waited in the foyer, bathed, shaven, and looking especially archdukely. His tailored black dinner jacket was snug enough to hint at the toned fencer's build beneath. Silver brocade wound over the velvet in whirling patterns, and black huntsman's boots rose to his knees. He carried a blackthorn cane capped with silver to match the ensemble, a picture of masculine beauty. If Amira had been anyone else, if she hadn't fought that thing from several weeks ago, if she had been ignorant of the truth of him, she might have thought herself lucky. Daindrith caught sight of her and went completely still. For a long moment, he made no movement except his eyes, appraising her from head to foot. Amira heated under his stare, flutters of warmth spreading up from the pit of her stomach. She liked the way he looked at her, she realized. It frightened her how much she liked it. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other and cleared his throat. Amira wondered why he would be coming for her personally instead of sending a footman or Thadrid, as would be expected. Then again, Daindrith's odd conduct was nothing new. "Do you approve, Your Highness?" Shazni's cheery tone cut through the awkward silence. "I do," Daindrith said, his voice hoarse. He cleared his throat and beckoned her to him with one hand. "Lady Amira." Amira stepped forward, taking care not to trip on the low hem of her dress, as Daindrith hooked her arm through his. He had a woodsy, golden cologne with hints of honey and cinnamon. The archduke pulled her closer against him as they slipped out into the hall. Two guards bearing halberds followed close behind, little more than hulking shadows in the dim candlelight of the hall. Daindrith led her through the hallways, distracted. The guards never stayed more than 1 or 2 paces back, but they were completely silent, save for the clank and rattle of their armor. At night, the palace was full of shadows, cast by numerous pillars and arches. Despite the many lamps, it would have been an assassin's haven if not for the guards at every other doorway and the way the sound echoed. "Did Shazni and her girls treat you well?" Daindrith asked. "Yes," Amira answered. She had no complaints. "How is your side?" Daindrith had taken to asking after her injury often enough on the road. He still sounded as if he cared. "Still sore, but manageable," Amira said. The potions in the bath had helped. "I'm glad to hear it. If you need anything, Shazni can send for one of the palace physicians. They're the best in the empire." Amira glanced to the guards, the only witnesses. "No matter how good your surgeon is, I'll still probably have a scar," she said flatly. "It will be joining a collection, actually." Amira had one on her knee from a nasty fall from a horse in her teens. Another sliced a pale line across her thigh from a bandit's dagger, not to mention several pale lines on her inner elbows. Those had been the first in the collection. "You didn't know you were getting a battered veteran, did you?" "Your body appeals to me just fine, Amira." Daindrith said it factually, levelly. Heat crept up the back of her neck at that. Her heart fluttered just a little and her mouth went dry. She licked her lips and tried to collect herself. But I'm sorry your father used you, he murmured. I'm sorry you've known so much pain. There was a softness to his words that she wanted to trust but couldn't. Not quite. You're using me too, Amira said, her words lacking the edge she'd intended. Yes, Dangerith agreed, heaviness weighing his tone. Yes, I suppose I am. Dangerith expertly navigated a maze of doors, hallways, and steps, walking as though in a trance. The servants and guards they encountered stopped and bowed. The archduke acknowledged them with mumbled greetings and vacant nods. If there is any way for me to free you from your curse, I will do it. I swear to you. Dangerith stared straight ahead as he spoke. Do you believe me? Amira studied him closely, emotions winding into knots in her chest. I don't know, she said. It doesn't really matter, I suppose. Every curse could be broken. That was one of the rules of magic. But possible wasn't the same as likely or easy. Dangerith's arm grew tense beneath her hand. In the flash of the lamplight, she noticed a muscle tighten in his cheek. No one should have to live under a curse, Amira. Maybe some of us deserve it, Amira said softly. You think we deserve our curses? She'd nearly told him as much to his face not so long ago, but she didn't hurl her insults back at him this time. Someone did, Amira answered. We're both paying for sins, either our own or our father's. Dangerith remained silent after that.